Ladies and gentlemen, if I could invite you to take your seats, the program is about to begin. If I could please invite you to find your seats, the program is about to begin.
Hello, would everyone please take their seats? We're ready to begin today's luncheon. If everyone would please take their seats. Thank you. Welcome to the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition Luncheon. Before we share lunch together, I'd like to invite you to pray with me. If you would please bow your heads. Dear Lord, thank you for this day and for the opportunity to gather together. Lord, we lift up our time together and ask that you would bless it and bless our conversations. Father, we lift up Senator Langford and his staff, and we ask for wisdom and discernment for them as they consider and make decisions that affect our country and our world. Lord, we lift up our country to you and ask for your blessings over our nation. Help us be a light in a world where there's a lot of darkness. Lead us in sharing your love and compassion with those we encounter. Father, we give you thanks for the lunch and for that we're about to share, and ask you to bless the food to our bodies. We also ask for your blessings over those who have prepared and served our meal today. All of these things we humbly ask in the name of Jesus. Amen. Now it is my pleasure to welcome the governor of the Chickasaw Nation, Bill Anatubby, to say a few welcoming words. Governor.
Good afternoon. Welcome. Isn't it a wonderful day? I'm really thrilled to be here this afternoon. I'm surrounded by people who care deeply about America's role in the world and how leading around the world is a win for us here in Oklahoma as well. The last several years have shown just how interconnected and intertwined our security and our prosperity are with the rest of the world. And we're here today to make the case that U.S. international assistance makes America stronger at home and abroad. This isn't a Democratic or Republican issue. It's an issue that impacts all Americans. How we show up in the world is worth talking about at the kitchen table with your family and with your friends or at a local diner. This community right here is special. Here in this room are leaders, not just Oklahoma City leaders, but leaders across the state. From big cities and small towns, students to representatives of Fortune 500 companies, military veterans to faith and humanitarian leaders, we are able to come together for conversation like today's to find common ground about how America shows up in the world. And it's an honor to be here, having this important community conversation with all of you. And I thank you for taking the time to join us. And it's now my pleasure to welcome to the podium USGLC's President and CEO, Liz Schrader.
Well, good afternoon, and Governor, thank you, Barry, thank you. I am so thrilled to be here with all of you in Oklahoma City for USGLC to host, and especially the home of NBA's #1 Thunder. Pretty exciting. And to welcome this incredible group. And we have thousands, I'm told, joining us online as well from Oklahoma and throughout the Southwest. We have a very impressive group of speakers lined up for today. They're going to be formally introduced in a moment, but I have to say a big welcome to our featured speaker, Senator Langford. You know, Senator, your deep voice of faith and wisdom, your belief in humanity to do the right thing, has truly made our world better, America stronger, and I know everybody in this room thanks you for everything you do and everything that you have done on national security, on making our world better, and I'm so looking forward to our conversation together. I have watched you over the last few weeks, been on TV a lot, to talk about your book, your wonderful book about Turnaround America Revival. If you haven't read it, I strongly encourage all of you. He didn't even ask me to give a book plug, but I'm telling you this because it's really wonderful. It has the theme that I want to talk about today, because it's about, you know, people of faith to live their faith, but to take responsibility to make our world better. And there's lots to quote from. I'm going to do it when I have the chance to interview and moderate. But this is one of my favorite quotes that should ground us in the conversation. Washington doesn't change the country changes Washington. So think about it. It's a lot of the reasons why I'm so excited to be here in Oklahoma and to have the conversation here. Because USGLC is all about the fabric of our country. We are about lifting up the citizens of America, because who we represent, just as the governor said of who's in this room, is we're military leaders and veterans and faith leaders and farmers and mayors and business leaders. That's who we are. We actually got called from the Washington Post years ago the Strange Bedfellow Coalition. And we're actually proud of that, because we don't think it's so strange that when Americans can sit and break bread together and have conversations and actually listen to each other with respect, there should be nothing strange about it. And so we're so proud actually to even start with and say thank you to our Oklahoma Advisory Committee that's here today and those that couldn't be with us, including our co-chairs, the wonderful Governor Henry and Governor Fallon Christensen. They couldn't be here, but they've been giving us such wonderful leadership, as well as our local partners who helped put today's program together. They're listed on the screen. So thank you. Yes, that's worth it. Thank you to all of them. And it is conversations like this that we're going to have today that we actually do all over the country, year and year round. Last year alone, we hosted over 100 conversations, forums, and town halls. As an example, I was in South Dakota with Senator, your colleague, now Majority Leader in the Senate, John Thune. And later, I think it's next week, I can't keep track of my schedule, I'll be back in South Dakota, in Mitchell, South Dakota, with Senator Round, and I'll finish out the weekend in Salt Lake City, Utah, with Senator John Curtis. I'm trying to get to every one of your senators, Senate colleagues, and I always ask a simple question. You know, how does America win? With our global leadership, with our investments in diplomacy, our investments in international assistance, how do we win for our local communities in states like Oklahoma? And when I ask that, I get these powerful answers. Veterans tell me that it means not having to put our troops in harm's way. Business leaders continue to tell me that it means more customers. Our farmers tell me that it means more markets for their crops. And what I hear over and over again is these stories about how our diplomacy and our international assistance, which is about 1% of our federal budget, keeps drugs and diseases and these other threats away from our shores. Now, I know you in Oklahoma understand that America's goodness is what makes America greatness. You have 1 out of every 5 jobs connected to trade. Agriculture exports alone is about $2.4 billion. You understand how these connections open up markets for you. I remember watching Secretary of State Rubio's confirmation hearings, where he laid it out, I think, very clearly. He said our international investments need to be about making us safer, stronger, and more prosperous. I couldn't agree more. In fact, next week, we at USGLC will be rolling out a blueprint about how we not only use these tools, but reform these tools to ensure, just as I think we all would agree, that international assistance and diplomacy delivers for the American people and are effective, accountable, and transparent. And why? Because the stakes are so high. As we'll talk about in our conversation, our rivals, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, they are playing to win. And if we step back, they are stepping in. And so we need the tools we need to use, as the Thunder will use, their defense and offense very effectively to make sure that we step up and that we take the seat at the table, because otherwise our rivals certainly will. And the people that I hear this most from is our military leaders. Just recently, I saw the combatant commanders that are in military service right now saying that over and over again in hearings on Capitol Hill. I actually was on Capitol Hill with a group that we have organized. We have a group called the National Security Advisory Council. It's over 270 retired 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. You're going to hear from one of them today. And I took a few of them to Capitol Hill recently. And one of them, our co-chair, General Laura Richardson, just stepped down as the combatant commander of Southcom. And I'll just end with this one story. She talked about how she saw Panama, which is in the news quite a bit lately. We didn't have an ambassador for 5 years. Well, during those 5 years, China signed 47 bilateral agreements with Panama. So the stakes are real high if we want to be engaged. So that's what we're going to talk about today, about what the stakes are and what it means to our national security, our faith, our economic interests, to kitchen table issues that affect us each and every day. This is a timely conversation, and we have a wonderful group who is going to help us understand and unpack all of them. So let's get started. And to introduce our wonderful speakers, I'm so thrilled to welcome to the podium 2 of our Oklahoma Advisory Committee members, Brenda Bartwick, who is the president and CEO of Jones PR, and Mark Funke, who is the president and CEO of Oklahoma Business Roundtable. Brenda and Mark, welcome to the stage.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Liz. I'm so excited you're here in Oklahoma. In 2018, when I learned the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition was launching an effort to bring public diplomacy to the local level, I was very excited and quickly asked how I can help. Because from my experience at the U.S. State Department, I have been passionate that the Foreign Service needs more people from the heartland, and the coalition's outreach educates people about this type of career opportunity, and it's never too late to think about the Foreign Service. While the coalition is also advocating for stronger diplomacy with other nations. And as you've already heard, the stakes of America's global leadership are higher than ever. With the growing number of international crises and humanitarian conflicts raging around the world, it's clear that leading globally matters locally. And that leading local initiative, as we do here in Oklahoma, can have an international impact. And that is why we need vital strategic investments in diplomacy and development to help fight corruption, promote the rule of law, and open new markets for Oklahoma goods and services, which is key to economic prosperity here in Oklahoma. For example, as Liz already said, 1 in 5 jobs in Oklahoma are supported by international trade. I mean, just think with energy and aerospace as the 2 largest industries in the state of Oklahoma, I mean, we are fueling the world. We're energizing the world with our energy. And with aerospace, with our MRO, our maintenance, repair, and overhaul companies, we're keeping planes flying around the world. And so we are heavily dependent on having good relationships with other countries. And also, which was stated, let's not forget our agricultural exports. The world loves our beef, and then they love our wheat, and we produce a lot of cotton that goes around the world. So in addition to the many products that Oklahoma provides to the world, we are also providing a lot of services to companies and governments and there's many in this room who I know who are working with global companies and working with governments in other countries. And just like my company, Jones PR, we're working with global marketing firms and with international companies. So I just want to thank you, Liz, that you have the vision, and the USGLC has the vision of that the coalition understanding that public diplomacy and international relations is truly local. You know, a lot of times people think it's, oh, that's what's happening in Washington, D.C., but everybody in this room, you are the face of public diplomacy. You are the face of international trade. And I just so appreciate that Liz and the USGLC understands that and how we contribute to the greater good when it comes to international relations. So now I'm going to pass it off to my Oklahoma Advisory Committee member, co-member, Mark Funke, who's going to tell us about the Oklahoma Business Roundtable.
Thank you, Brenda. Appreciate that very much. What a great group. As Governor Anatubby said, this is a really unbelievable group of individuals and business owners and representatives from across our state and across our region. So thank you very much for taking your time to be here today to talk about these important issues. As she said, I am Mark Funke. I do have the opportunity to run the Oklahoma Business Roundtable. And just briefly, our organization is made up of 160 businesses from around the state in every industry that you can think of and in all geographies around the state. And the one common entity, the common attribute of all those is that they do believe that business leadership should advance Oklahoma's economy and actually the economy to the world. Our organization works really hard on a variety of different issues, but one of the things we do is that we do try and help our governor, our lieutenant governor, and our Department of Commerce here in Oklahoma to work on business economic development activities that they don't have either the budget for or are constrained from a spending standpoint to do. And, you know, the world's getting to be a smaller place, and Oklahoma's getting to be a bigger, more important place across the world. People are taking notice of what Oklahoma has and our capacities here. Recently, our Business Roundtable helped support an effort by our Commerce Department and the governor, Governor Stitt, to go to Southeast Asia and visit with leaders in Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea to talk about business relationships between Oklahoma, our companies here, and partnerships that exist currently and could exist in the future. Many of our Oklahoma Business Roundtable members, and I know several of you are here today, are involved in import and export activities, partnerships around the world, and it's critically important. We also just a couple of weeks ago supported 13 members from the Qatari business community to come here to Oklahoma to visit with our energy, our bioscience, our aviation, and even the film industry to talk about partnership opportunities in Oklahoma. So what is happening in Oklahoma is important to the world, and what's going on in the world is certainly important to Oklahoma, and we're going to hear about that today from our speakers. And I have the privilege of introducing our speakers, so I'm going to talk a little bit about them. Now, our first speaker said to just introduce him as Steve and say, Steve's here. But I'm not going to do that because he's a pretty important guy, and I want to tell you a little bit about him. Lieutenant General Stephen Speaks is a 35-year veteran of our military serving in the Army. So thank you for your service to this country for 35 years. Most recently, while he was in the military, he was the Deputy Chief of Staff of the G8 programs of the United States Army, and he served as the Principal Staff Officer for Fiscal Strategy. Before that, he led the planning and execution for all life support for all ground forces in Iraq and Afghanistan, and that only meant that he supervised over 20,000 civilian and military personnel during that time. Kind of a big job. Lieutenant General Speaks is also now in civilian life. He is the CEO of Rough Terrain Center, which is a Texas-based company that builds material handling equipment, very large material handling equipment for the military and also for commercial use. He showed me a picture of one of the devices that they build. The tires are 7 feet tall. You can too have one in your yard if you can fit it in your neighborhood. They're really big. So thank you for being here very much. Certainly appreciate it. Next on the agenda is Bob Zachritz. He is the Vice President for Advocacy and Government Relations for the World Vision Organization, where he has been since 2003. His current position, he leads the World Vision's policy engagement throughout the U.S. government. He has presented and presents in front of the Congress, the White House, the United Nations, the World Trade Organization, and the State Department, just to name a few things that he does. And prior to joining the World Vision Organization, he worked for 15 years as a staffer in both Republican and Democratic congressional offices in Washington. So we've got two guys here that understand the military, and they certainly understand what's going on in the civilian life, and they understand what happens in business and the economy. And I want to tell you something special about Bob that's not in his resume. He is a saxophone player, and he just played with a group at Carnegie Hall. So maybe you can entertain us later. That's really great. And our keynote address comes from someone who does not need an introduction to this group, our wonderful Senator James Langford. Senator Langford has been our senator, one of our senators from Oklahoma since 2015. And currently he serves on the Finance Committee, Homeland Security, and Governmental Affairs Committee, and also on select committees on ethics and intelligence. Now, you all know that before he became a senator in 2015, he also served as our congressional representative for the Oklahoma's 5th Congressional District. Now, prior to being in the politics of things, he currently is and was ordained as a Southern Baptist minister and served for 20 years with kids and families all over Oklahoma in that capacity. And I will tell you, as a personal note on Senator Langford, I've known him since he was a congressman. And I would tell you, from a business perspective, you think maybe sometimes it's hard to get to your legislators and that sort of thing. He is not. He has always been someone that was available, was an advocate, was someone who asked questions. He wanted to know, he wanted to help, he wanted to find out what would be good for your business or my business. And we are blessed to have someone like Senator Langford in Washington speaking for Oklahoma, trying to make Oklahoma a better place, but in the concept of Oklahoma inside the United States and the world as well. So I couldn't think of a better senator to have, and we're happy you're here, and just keep doing what you're doing. Please help me welcome Senator Langford.
You're still eating. Have a seat. So I'm going to speak for just a couple of minutes and let y'all finish dessert. And then all the panel's going to come up and we'll get a chance to be able to have a broader conversation. It's an absolute pleasure to get a chance to be in front of this group. As I look around this gathering, Liz was right, Mark was right, this is a remarkable gathering of people. So hopefully this is a good dialogue for us, just to be able to talk about what it is that God has us in this place and this time to be able to do. I want to just set a little bit of context, and I may set this in a little bit different way, but I want to try to combine Easter and Tax Day at the same time. So what does Easter, Tax Day, and the position of America have to do in common? So let me tell you a quick biblical story with this. Jesus, when he was on his way, literally the days and the hours before Palm Sunday and leading into Holy Week that we're in now, he goes to the town called Jericho. And on his way to Jericho, he looks up and sees the tax collector. There's April 15th for you. He looks up and sees the tax collector, Zacchaeus, up in a tree. And he says a very audacious thing. As he's walking through town, he sees the tax collector up in the tree, and he says, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house today to eat lunch. Now, if any of us just randomly saw somebody coming through town and said, I'm coming over today, we would think that's a pretty audacious thing to say. I don't invite myself over to other people's houses. They have to invite me to be able to come over. But he looked at him and said, I'm coming to your house today. None of us think that's audacious because of who it was. We forget as Americans, in much of the world, we don't have to be invited. Most places want us to be there. And in most countries, in most spots that we go to around the world, we could literally pick up the phone and say, we're an American, and we want to sit down and visit with you, and most everyone would say, come. we forget as Americans who we are some days. I sat down with the ambassador from Australia several years ago, and he and I were chit-chatting back and forth, and over the course of the conversation, he said two things that really stuck out to me. One of them was, everybody wants to be America, and Americans, all they want to do is argue with each other. And then he said, we can't figure out who America is anymore. We are your little brother, and we look up to you, and I can't figure out who my big brother is anymore. That has never left me in that conversation, both in twofold. One is, he's right. Americans are always pushing on Americans. We're always pushing to be better. We see every problem that happens and think we should be able to solve that. You go to many parts of the world, and when there's a problem, there's like, yeah, there's a problem. It's going to always be there. And when there's a problem in America, we're like, yeah, there's a problem. We need to fix that. Let's figure out how to be able to do it. It's a different driving force for us that causes us to push each other in different ways. But in many parts of the world, they're trying to figure out who we are. And it is up to us to be able to articulate that. So as crazy as it seems, we need to start inviting ourselves over again. That is engaging with other countries, not pulling back, engaging in a way, and saying we want to be able to be there, to be able to do what we can to be able to help. To be the folks that say, we don't know how to solve everything, but when an American shows up, we can convene a group that will actually get together to be able to talk. Several years ago, I had the honor to be able to be the speaker at the first ever event of Palestinian and Israeli business people. That they actually got together for a conference, and they wanted to be able to talk about how can we start doing business together. Literally, their statement was, governments are struggling to be able to find ways to be able to talk, but we know how to do business. Let's figure out a way to be able to do business. And as I sat at the table and spoke at the event and then just chit-chat with different folks that were there, I'll never forget sitting in a conversation at a table at that point where a man who owns land in Hebron across the Green Line and a Jewish businessman who owns grocery stores were sitting across from each other at our table visiting. And the man from Hebron said, why don't you open a grocery store in my neighborhood? Why don't you come? We'd like to have your grocery stores. They're some of the best stores around. Why won't you do business in my neighborhood? And the grocery store owner, Jewish grocery store owner said, because I can't lease land there. I'm not allowed. You won't let me in. And as the two of them swapped conversation back and forth, I literally watched a deal come together at the table where two people who hadn't spoken to each other started speaking to each other, made a business deal that then led to that connection, which is still bearing fruit still today in an ongoing dialogue. That happened because an American happened to be there in the process and people gathered together. It wasn't me. It's the blue passport that I hold in the country that I represent that brought everybody together. It was the ability for folks to say, if the American's going to be there, then we're going to actually sit down and be able to talk. It is still a place in the world that we have that we should be wise in how we actually engage. Because right now, in Burundi, in the DRC, and Rwanda, they're deciding right now if we're going to watch another mass loss of life. And it'd be good if the Americans were there in the middle of it to just say, can we talk, before this breaks out into large-scale violence again. If we gather folks together, it does make a difference. We do have unique opportunities to be able to do that. Now, we're going to have a dialogue today. I'm really looking forward to the panel. I'm just going to sit and listen the whole time. But I'm really looking forward to the panel and the conversation on it. But for those of us that are in Oklahoma, sometimes people smile at us and say, you know, what do we have to do with international policy? Well, let me just tell you, just in the last 2 days, I was at a Oklahoma business that while I was visiting that Oklahoma business, there was a group from Tunisia that was also there. interacting with them, working on business opportunities. I just left the FAA and got a chance to be able to stop by the Mike Maroney Center, which is a phenomenal resource for the entire world that's there. And they're loaded with people literally from all over the world that are currently there working on flight safety and all the details of what we're doing. It's not uncommon for us to be able to go through fabulous, beautiful Enid, Oklahoma, and to be able to pass by people from 10 different nations that are there, that are pilots that are being trained to be able to go back and to be able to serve in their country. We're used to it in Oklahoma, of the entire world interacting with us, and of us finding a way to be able to interact with them. But those partnerships are essential long term, and they bring peace. Literally down the street from here right now, there are a group of Ukrainian physicians that are learning how to be able to do surgery at OU. That's happened for the last year and a half, actually, where surgeons are leaving from Ukraine, learning how to be able to do surgery more effectively to be able to save lives. They're mentored there by our surgeons here in Oklahoma. Then they return back. And when they get into a complicated surgery there in Ukraine, they link in by video with an Oklahoma surgeon, and that Oklahoma surgeon talks them through what to do to be able to save their life on the battlefield. That's happening today here in Oklahoma. We're very connected to the world, and that's a good thing for us, and that's a good thing for the world. One other quick comment, then let's visit all together on this. There's a lot of conversation about trade. Have you noticed? You might not read the news much. In the Declaration of Independence, when we wrote a very formal letter to the good King George in 1776 and shipped it over to him, and a group of early Americans signed away their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. In the complaints that we had against good King George and the things that he was restricting us from, and one of the reasons we were pushing away from England at that time, in that list of complaints is he is restricting our trade with the world. We were free traders before we were a country. We've been passionate about engaging with the world in trade before we ever had a constitution, because we've been connected from the very, very beginning. It's in our DNA. It's who we are as a people. And I think that should continue in every way that we possibly can to be able to engage with the world. Because we not only bring a great set of values, we also bring great products to the world. And the world wants our products. And we should do everything we can to leverage opening up markets where it's closed to us around the world, but also providing those opportunities for us to be able to connect with the rest of the world. Because when we have the opportunity to connect with the rest of the world, we provide great products, great resources, but we also provide our values. Right now, Chinese government is developing long-term relationships with a few African nations that are dictatorships. And they're literally giving to those dictatorships surveillance equipment, camera equipment, the technology and the know-how to be able to monitor and control their people. They're teaching dictators how to be more effective dictators. Literally. While we are speaking about the opportunities for freedom, they are speaking and saying, America is chaotic. Just look at America and the chaos. We bring order and structure. We're again at a moment that we were at decades ago, where there's literally two sets of world ideas out there. And we're going to determine in this time the direction of the globe for the future. It will either be controlled centrally, like the Chinese Communist Party does, or it will be freedom and opportunity for every individual to be able to express their full expression of life. Those two sets of values are sitting out there. I think we should engage, because there are billions of people that are counting on America being America and exporting our greatest export, freedom. That's our best export that we actually send to the world. And the world is counting on us to actually bring that to them so that they have the opportunity and their children have the opportunity to live as free as we do in the days ahead. So that's what I hope the conversation ends on today. I'm grateful that everybody got a chance to be able to join in. So let's have a conversation. By the way, while they're joining on stage, can I just tell you, sitting in this chair, I've got a tiny bit of PTSD from my last time. About 3 weeks ago, I spoke at the Bush Center, which at the Bush Library, if you had been there, it's a phenomenal place. I was invited to speak on foreign policy, and it was such a privilege and an honor to be able to do that. And so I'm sitting there in this formal setting at the Bush Center, going through the interview. Kay Bailey Hutchison was the other speaker, and so she and I are speaking through everything. I speak to my staff at the very end of it and say, how did you think that went? I thought it went pretty well. And they said, actually, your left sock was down the entire time. I never heard a thing you said because all I could see was your white leg poking out.
How are we doing?
Yeah,
Okay,
so I double-checked it.
You
real
look
quick
great.
just to be able to
Is
make
that okay
sure.
if it goes down, somebody put a
Somebody
thumb up?
let me know.
All right. Well, other than your sock, you look great, and that was extraordinary. And I just want to, on behalf of all of us, thank you. In 8 minutes, what you just did was pretty extraordinary.
Thanks.
I want to pick up on the first part of your blue passport and showing up in the world as America. But I would say it's not just showing up as America, it also has to show up as a leader. And you're a leader, and you're a leader with a very powerful voice. I mentioned in my opening about your book. It's full of your personal stories, your personal faith. It's about about how you view leadership. And I want to share one of your stories, and I want to ask you a question about it. And there's so many stories, but I'm picking one, and it speaks to what you just said. And Senator, I hope I get this right, but you'll tell me if I don't. But it happened at Oklahoma City Airport, and you had a constituent grab you and say that they were a constituent, they didn't agree with anything.
Right.
They actually connected with one of your more liberal colleagues. And in this day and age, I think a lot of policymakers would have walked away, but you didn't. You said you had a few minutes before your flight, let's find common ground. And as you wrote the story, you found common ground on food, on sports, and the thunder. Okay, there we go. Yay. And some policy. And this is what you said. You concluded by saying what you just basically said to all of us. When the volume is lower, sometimes people can hear each other out and solve the problem instead of yell about it. And to me, it's not just an American passport. It's also a leader. It's a person who stands up and says, we need to listen and we need to work together. So share with us two things maybe to kick this off. Why did you write this book? What are you trying to tell all of us who are willing to listen to you and to each other? And so what does it tell us that how we need to lead in the world, not just because we're Americans, but because we're people who have something to say to each other?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. The book is actually 3 years in the writing.
Wow.
So it's not been recent. I've had a couple of folks say, you should write this in the last couple of months, and I just smiled at them and said, no.
That's
no,
my
this
family.
This has been
My
on
staff.
airplanes and weekends and everything for the last 3 years to be able to pull some of these concepts together. I'm just concerned about the direction of the country just in where we are. The volume has gotten so high that we're not listening to each other. Yeah. We do have a lot of common ground. We do have a lot of differences. The story that you told there, I also mentioned almost every time, it's not every time, but almost every time somebody walks up to me and says, I'm a constituent of yours, the conversation's about to go sideways. Almost no one...
So no one say that
Almost no one says, I'm a constituent, I'm really excited. It's like, I'm a constituent, and I've got something to say. But for that conversation with her, it was brief, but I thought, okay, you're right, we disagree. And she mentioned several things like, you're right, we disagree on those things completely. Let's keep talking, because there's probably some other things that we could actually figure out how to be able to do. The second part about the book is, I'm afraid that we as a nation are becoming more and more that if you have a title, you're a leader. If you're an elected person, you're a leader. Everyone else is like, yeah, I'm really not a leader. And that's just not true. In leadership, as I try to define it in the book, is as simple as if you see a problem, and you invite somebody else to come help you solve it, you're a leader. So we've got to take leadership off the top shelf and say that's only for a select few on that. For those of us that see the problems and we see them, if we start engaging to do something about it, you are a leader. So I talk about even the blue passport on that. As I go as an American to that conference, it wasn't that I'm a senator and an American, it's that I was an American. Every single one of you, every single business leader, every single college leader that's here, if you show up in another country, another place, you are an American and you carry that with you and you have the opportunity to be able to open doors in conversation. We should be wise in how we do that and take advantage of that role that we're in internationally. And when we see a problem, actually engage to say, what are we going to do to actually solve that?
All right, so, well, we have several leaders. We have leaders, everybody in this room, but we have some incredible ones on stage. And I thought we would let's start with talking about some of these global threats. You started talking about some of the foreign policy issues that can go south or they can go positive. You have a very important seat on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. And last month, I watched one of the hearings on the global threat assessment. You saw the classified version of it. I did not, but I saw enough of it that worried me. So I want to read you in on one sentence of it for everybody to understand, and then I have a question. So it said, Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea individually and collectively are challenging U.S. interests in the world, promoting alternative systems to compete with the United States, primarily in trade, finance, and security. So you've been a long-time voice on this concept of peace through strength. Ronald Reagan, and President Trump now has really built his foreign policy around it. How do you see our U.S. global engagement advancing our national security through peace through strength? And what happens if we step back? And then, General, I'm coming to you after that.
Yeah, I think if we step back, it's a danger not only for Americans, it's a danger for people around the world. Mm-hmm. I'm not one that says America is the world's police officer, but if I can be polite about it to the rest of the world, we are the teacher on the playground at times, where the playground has its own particular noise when the teacher is there, but remove the teacher from the playground, it can get pretty ugly. And it's not that the teacher's doing anything in particular, just presence there on it. When we're engaged, it's different on that, and people engage in it differently because they think, okay, the Americans are here, and we'll have you facilitate again conversation to be able to get together. What has happened in the war with Russia and Ukraine, and the sanctions that we've rightfully put on Russia in the process, have driven them into the arms of multiple other entities. China and Russia didn't necessarily get along 10 years ago, and I think everyone just thinks they have commonality. Oh no, they did not get along. But Russia had no place to be able to sell products to, and they started developing that relationship and reopening with China. Russia has needed additional arms, and so they have worked with Iran in a way they had not historically done that, and the same from North Korea. North Korea and Iran were glad to be able to play in the big boy sandbox with larger countries and suddenly have a sense of importance, and it has pulled the four countries together in a way that was not true a decade ago. And I think that there is an awakening to say, hey, those are individuals that didn't always get along. Now they're joining together in some different projects. The more they work together, practice together, rehearse together, that is a real threat to worldwide global stability.
And are we where we need to be in terms of responding to that?
I think we are responding to some of the military threats on that and reaching out. A good example of that will be South Africa. Yep. South Africa started to be able to connect with Russia in a way that they had not historically done. We have engaged the State Department and through the Department of Defense with South Africa to go, hold on, where are you going in this? And so I think that's important. We've had to do the same thing, quite frankly, with our ally Turkey, which has been very unpredictable in many ways of late, to be able to engage so that they are not running into the arms of Russia, who is making all kinds of promises to them that, quite frankly, the Russian economy can't keep those promises, but they're making the promises anyway. So I do think it's important, and we're watching some of that engagement, but it's precarious based on just the war that's actually happening there.
General Speaks, 35 years in the Army. That means you started your service to this country when Ronald Reagan was president. So I want to go back to this peace through strength. Everybody, I assume a lot of you are aware that peace through strength was certainly about our military buildup, but he was a champion of the non-military side. He was this champion of kind of General Mattis's famous statement that if you don't fund the State Department, if you don't, he would often say also USAID and our development programs, then he would need more ammunition. Take us to your battlefield experience. What is your experience of seeing how our military and our non-kinetic use of diplomacy and our international assistance, how do they work together to advance our national security, picking up on what the Senator just talked about?
Well, Liz, that was a great introduction, and you're right. Instead of a battlefield experience, I'd like to talk in that era about what I learned as a very young and very humble officer. I reported to the Pentagon in the early 80s as an intern on the Joint Staff. It was very interesting. My job was, at that time, essentially primarily involved in reproducing printed material. I spent hours at the printer. Everything I printed was top.
That's where you learn everything, at the printer.
I learned a lot. But I also got a chance to overhear conversations. And what I realized from the senior leaders that I was around, there was a partnership between the President, his Secretary of State, Secretary Schultz, and Secretary Weinberger that was incredibly close. They met weekly, they strategized weekly. And so this image that says the Cold War was won because of defense buildup construes the idea or gives rise to the idea that it was all about weapons. What I observed was it was an equal mix of diplomacy and use of military might. I think we've forgotten that as we rearmed the U.S. military and by extension Europe, we did so in the face of massive public opposition in Europe. There were enormous demonstrations in all the major capitals, London, Bonn, where they were against what was called the INF deployment, strategic nuclear weapons being reinserted into Europe as an effort to try to get the Russians to negotiate. The public diplomacy side won that side of the game. That gave us the opportunity to strengthen our military and to deploy it in a more effective way. But the precursor to success was the diplomatic side. It was a very active Secretary of State working through a very, very engaged effort with European governments that made that possible. And for me as a young officer, it was a seminal lesson in weapons are important, soldiers are important, but the precursor to it was the active engagement of our diplomats.
Fascinating. I have more questions for you, but Bob, I want to bring you in now. You would think I'm going to wait for you for when we get to the faith conversation, but I actually have a really interesting question to ask. World Vision is one of the largest faith-based, maybe the largest faith-based humanitarian organization in the world, but which means you're in some of the most conflict, fragile hotspots in the world. And I have been seeing for so many years that some of these difficult places that affect our national security, you're there, where children are dying of before the age of 5 in places that are Somalia and Syria and some of these places. What are you seeing in terms of how our humanitarian aid and programs fit into these conflict areas that we need to worry could spiral out of control?
Sure, thank you, and thank you all for the panel members. With World Vision, one of our values is how do we help the most vulnerable children? Where are the most vulnerable children? So that's one of our metrics. Usually most vulnerable is because there is conflict, there's natural disaster, there is poor governance. Those are drivers that go into. So then first we say, where's the most vulnerable? And then we try to raise, most of World Vision United States' money is raised through private donors. We have about 1 million donors in every state. And then we also have major donors, and we have corporate donors and foundation donors. We also get U.S. government money. So it's not just the government. So first we look, where's the vulnerable people? And then based on our values, and it's also an American value of caring for life and liberty, that's really important, protecting human life, God-given respect for human life. Sometimes we can raise private money and we don't need the government money, but I'll give you an example in Syria. We've been trying for 2 years to raise private money. This was when the conflict broke. We could not raise money. We actually had an op-ed. We raised money quicker in Nepal in 1 day for an earthquake than we had in 2 years for Syria. In this case, the government money started. We eventually found a major donor who contributed $15 million. He was a Vietnam veteran because he had been in war. He had seen the human consequences of war. And there's, the military term is, the collateral damage, but it's people. It's people who unnecessarily get caught up in that. And so we were able to respond then with government money, with a major donor with $15 million. And actually that $15 million carried us when the government closed, U.S. government had a shutdown, there was inconsistency in funding, and the private money, kicked in. So it is the blend of private donors, and sometimes the U.S. government will step in. I want to highlight, we're driven by values, but it's also people first lead with their heart. They care. But then their head kicks in. What's the rate of return? Are you getting impact? Government donors do the same thing. First, they care. Is it in your values? And then what is the impact? And one of the key impacts is it's almost like containing a fire. This fire could blow up and out, and we have more loss of human life, a more serious conflict, or we can contain it and then either put the fire out or keep it, contained without really exploding.
I have one more question. We could go on and on national security, but I want to get to a couple other topics. But I have one more that I really want to touch on. And Senator, I want to dig a little deeper on China. It's an issue that you have taken a real leadership focus on. You introduced a bill, I think it was last month, that is a really important piece of legislation. It's called the Belt and Road Oversight Act. And it comes at a time where China is aggressive it's really leaning in. We don't know all the data, but the data that we know, they put $8 billion, according to what they said, in increasing their diplomatic. They have more consulates and embassies than anybody in the world. They've increased their development aid by 525% in the world in the last decade. I've said for a long time that when we think of our China strategy, it really needs to include these non-kinetic tools that we've been talking about. So I took a look at your bill. It's so smart. It talks about how we use our embassies to monitor China, how we develop comprehensive strategies, how we use our tools. So maybe you can give us a look at why you're taking this approach, how you use some of these economic tools of development to make sure we get it right.
Yeah. There are a couple of things that we're trying to do right now. There's two different bills. There's another one's going to follow. It's kind of a twin bill in it.
I don't know about the new one.
It's all right.
Okay.
The Belt and Road piece basically says for all of our embassies, they need to track what Chinese projects are actually happening. How are the Chinese using their leverage in these different countries?
They're not transparent at all.
They're not transparent at all. We can see it, we can note it, but the embassies are not assigned to be able to do that. So they're aware of it, but not really tracking it, and then we're not pulling those all together to be able to see globally where's the movement, where's the engagement on this. We're aware of the Belt and Road Initiative, and if any of you have not seen this, is basically China will often go to countries and will say, hey, you really have a bad port, or you really have a bad airport, or whatever it may be, and say, we're willing to float the loan for this, or to be able to loan you the money for it when no one else will. The simple catch is if you can't pay it back, we get to have it. And so they'll go into a country, then wait 3 or 4 years and say, you haven't been able to pay our loan back, that's now ours. And they're now operating it, running it, bringing Chinese labor to be able to operate it, and they're spreading their footprint around the world. They've now established their first military base outside of the Asian region on it, where they've actually established in the Horn of Africa a military outpost on it. So they're actively spreading around the world to be able to do this. We're not tracking that. In a way that's consistent to be able to see the patterns of movement on that. So I want to be able to do that. The other piece that we have that's coming on is called Deter Act. The Deter Act just basically says to China, did you see what we did to Russia when they invaded Ukraine? And the sanctions that were put in place, the American companies that pulled out immediately on that. Here's the process that will happen if China invades Taiwan. So the Chinese will know economically, here are the steps we're going to take, and here's the speed that we're going to take those, because it will be already pre-established on it. The second thing is it tells every American company, if you're doing business in China and you have any relationships with the Communist Party, use that leverage now, because here's the process now that American companies will be pulled out of China at that moment. It's trying to use our economic leverage to say, let's tamp down the rhetoric here between China and Taiwan to be able to keep that in its current status at this point, rather than an invasion of Taiwan that would literally spiral the economy around the world.
Very thoughtful. As I said, we could go on national security, but I want to switch to faith and our values, which you've been talking about, the values. I actually got into my own self around the issue of religious freedom as a young girl, and given I'm a grandma of 3 and expecting 3 more, that was a long time ago. Senator, maybe I'll start with you, because again, your faith has been such a tremendous role in guiding your personal, professional work, and as you were introduced, you're ordained Southern Baptist. I have heard you in the National Prayer Breakfast, often where you have talked about not only do you lead there, but as you traveled the world, you've gone to other citizens' prayer breakfasts. Can you talk about why engagement in the world has mattered so much to you from that point of view? But also, when it comes to human suffering, why America needs to lead on that issue from a government point of view? We know why we do it personally. Yeah. Why does government matter?
We don't have wars with people that have freedom of religion, if I can just say it, just that simple. If you have freedom of faith, to be able to live your faith, that's usually not an oppressive country. And it's just one of those little simple barometers. The more oppressive a nation is to its own people on faith, you'll find they're oppressive in other areas, and it eventually leads to oppressive control and then aggression on that. And so, as simple as it sounds, if we could export the First Amendment right of just having the free exercise of religion, for individuals to have any faith that they're choosing, the ability to change their faith, or to have no faith at all, and that's respected by a government, that matters in our diplomacy and, quite frankly, economically as well. As we're doing business with places, if there's a freedom of exchange of ideas, including faith ideas, that matters. My faith is very important to me, and I want to continue to thrive in my own faith, but I want to also protect the rights of other individuals, even if they share a different faith, to be able to thrive in their faith as well. That's something I think that we should protect, and that's something we should export. Literally, my first amendment that I had of any bill was in 2015. We were doing the Trade Promotion Authority at that time, and the last amendment in the Trade Promotion Authority was my amendment, actually, and it was, when we do international negotiations on trade, we should bring up the issue of religious liberty as a part of our negotiations. My theory on that was, while we have leverage and countries are saying to us, we want to trade with America, we should all say, well, let's talk to you about the issue of religious oppression in your country and try to negotiate that as well. And to have that
it got passed.
It did get passed, actually, and was included in the Trade Promotion Authority.
Good for you. Good for you. Bob, World Vision, this is a motivation of your members. You have a huge membership here in Oklahoma. What is motivating your members? Is it the same as what the senator said, to not only give personally, but believe that as the American government, we should be invested in our humanitarian response?
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting, I started in this field because of religious freedom too. As a devout Christian, I wanted giving people freedom to be true to who they are. I'm a Christian. There's other people who might be Jewish or Muslim. How do you be free or no faith at all to be true to your conscience and true to your values? And that's a free society. So that leads to free speech. It leads to debate. And so I feel like that is an affirmation of a key value that we have. The other thing I would highlight was, as World Vision, we're Christian. To start off with, the values of the golden rule. I have found, for Christians, do unto others when others do unto you. That goes into other faiths and people of no faith. It's a good bedrock of law. The other aspect was, loving God and loving your neighbor. And so I feel like it's really an expression for our private donors. I was talking with one of our World Vision once did the Faith and Justice Bible. We actually, if for Christians, many times in the New Testament, you look at Jesus' letters, they're in red. We highlighted all the scripture verses in the Old and the New Testament that talked about caring for the widow and the orphan. There's like 2,500 scripture verses. A colleague mentioned a next major theme is giving. About 1,900 scripture verses to give that God has given to us that we're required to give to other. That donor in Syria, he said, God blessed me. He saved my life. I saw people get killed in Vietnam War. I want to give back, and I'm giving $50 million. So that's a driver of many times of our private giving. The other thing I want to highlight on managing conflict. A common value, I've been to maybe 40 countries, been to 6 continents. And like the senator dialogued with the constituent who he didn't really agree with, a common value is parents love their kids. Right. I don't care if you're secular, if you're religious, you help your child, you will get my goodwill. You help my son, my daughter, whom I love, and you help them through a problem. We all go through ups and downs, and you're there, you will be goodwill. We had someone who, as a boy, was hungry in India, and it was through U.S. government money that he got food. And he's a Christian, and he was thankful to the United States his whole life because they came to meet him in a moment of need. And that can lead to other things like a good trading partner. They might want to do business. They might want to come to the United States to go for education. But in a moment of need. And so I say this, values are important, we're driven, but then even donors move into their heart and head. What's the impact? And it's appropriate for the U.S. government to say, okay, values, and like what Secretary Rubio said, okay, then we believe in human life, we believe in freedom. How best do we invest where it's in our interest? And this is why I feel like in our interest, it has a payoff in trade. It has a payoff in stopping conflict from coming into our shores. So that's the link. We're driven by our values. Our private donors are driven, both major and private donors, but I feel like we then get to be ambassadors for our nation because I feel like I'm an ambassador for my faith. I'm an ambassador for the donors in the United States, and then I'm an ambassador for the U.S. government when we're delivering these programs.
General, on this point, I remember when Ebola hit, the military and the civilian community really worked hand in hand. Do you see this point of when we engage on a humanitarian level, what's the security ROI, return on investment, that you've seen?
It's enormous, Liz. We can't conceive of an environment where a U.S. soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, is not operating somewhere in the vicinity of a civilian population, because by nature, wars are fought among and around people. The more we can influence that population to think favorably of our cause, of the men and women who wear our uniform, the greater our chances not only of success but also survival, which of course matters to every parent. So I think we have to recognize that when we think of a campaign plan, how America will be successful, we never ignore the other elements that are called supporting or enabling forces. And certainly the concept of influencing hearts and minds, putting ourselves in a position to minimize damage and to be a positive and, if possible, a benign force, easy to exert our will is very, very important.
Senator, one area that I've seen the faith community really take a leadership role in is in global health. I think of 2 great senators from the state of Oklahoma, Senator Coburn, who played a leadership role in leading on global health. Senator Inhofe, who we lost last year, I think went to Africa, if I have my count right, 187 times. These were strong champions on this issue, on programs like PEPFAR that has saved 26 million people, on really incredibly effective programs like Gavi. Gavi is probably an acronym a lot of people in this room don't know, but that is probably the most effective delivery of vaccines. And now we have a measles breakout. One of the concerns we're seeing is that there's calls for some cuts to our global health programs right now. Not all of them, but some of them. What's your sense of how we address a pressure to certainly curtail government spending, but these have been effective programs that you yourself have championed? Sure. How do we balance that right?
Yeah, PEPFAR is a great example of that. It was the single most significant human protecting of lives of any health program.
I'm sure it came up in your bush.
It did, actually.
Despite your sock.
It did, I did. No one remembered that because everyone apparently saw my white leg, but it didn't matter. But yeah, that was incredibly significant to be able to have that kind of leadership and that kind of engagement in the world. So right now, what the Trump administration and what Marco Rubio is doing is trying to be able to reevaluate and to be able to ask the question to other nations. At what point are you going to step into some of this, and what point are we going to lead in some of this? I think for the past decade and a half or so, more and more the world has determined The Americans have got this. And I think what President Trump is trying to say, we're not going to carry everything. We have $2 trillion in overspending this year. And it's enormous. It's a national security risk for us to be able to carry that much debt because we're absolutely dependent on money coming in from China and Japan and other places outside of the United States to be able to sustain our day-to-day operations. So we've got to figure out a way to be able to bend that curve and to be able to get spending under control. Now we can talk about the speed of the handoff of which country is going to take what. It became a very sudden, we're stopping all this. Europe, other countries are now trying to stand up and to be able to determine what can we do to be able to step in the gap. But we are going to have to be able to find out who else is going to be able to help carry the load because we are so significantly overspending every single year. The same challenge with that is if we withdraw from the world, we do lose that influence. We do lose that ability to be able to speak into difficult issues around the world. China would be glad to step in and say, I'll build your road, I'll build whatever it is to be able to engage. So we've got to find what we're really good at internationally, and that is exporting freedom and talking about how they can be more successful. China always brings in their people to be able to work. It's really helping the Chinese economy. We tend to go into places and to say, how can we help your workers be better so that you thrive? We want you to be a good trading partner and be a healthy nation in the days ahead so we can be successful together. We've got to shift that. But we're in a bit of a handoff right now on some of the projects on it. And we've got to figure out what are the main priorities, how are we doing those, and doing those well, and keep doing it well.
While we're continuing the conversation, we want to get your questions. On your table, you'll see some cards. Please take a moment, fill in your questions. You can add your name if you want. Be short because I've got to read them. And as clear of handwriting as you can, my colleagues will finish. We're going to turn to a conversation about Oklahoma, how the world connects to Oklahoma, particularly around the economy. So while we're collecting them, I'm going to throw out some questions. Senator, you mentioned there's a conversation going on about trade. I've noticed in tariffs. I saw your last tweet on this topic. It was right after the president announced the 90 days. I'm going to read it for everybody while you're writing your question. You said the president is the deal maker in chief. It's past time to get global trade barriers down, lower tariffs against American goods. Countries all over the world are coming to the table. It's time for China to do the same. Senator, where are we on this?
So I'm actually keep very close tabs on this because, as I mentioned before, Declaration of Independence was part of the frustration was with England. You're blocking our trade, and I would tell you, I've talked to multiple Oklahoma companies right now.
I bet they care.
Don't block my trade because they love it. We're trading every single day with nations all over the world, and you would think, okay, we're Oklahoma, everything's homegrown on that. It's global. We are very global and very engaged in a lot of places. So that's something I want to be able to keep going. And I think it helps every consumer. It helps every company. It helps us get new markets. Saying that, let me give you an illustration. I've talked about Australia already once on it. They're a close partner. Every single war we've ever fought, Australia's fought alongside of us. They're a very close ally and friend. But Australia blocks out our beef. We buy Australian beef. They refuse to be able to buy ours. They block ours out. We got to knock that off. Okay, that's two people sitting down at the table and saying we've got to be able to solve that. There are multiple countries around the world that they've got different protectionism on different products that right now the administration's actively trying to be able to knock down. I'll leave names out, but I would say it's somebody you've seen in the news. We spoke at length yesterday to be able to talk about, okay, what are the next deals? Where are the deals coming? What I'm hearing from most Oklahoma companies are, I'm great if we're opening up more markets. When does the first deal get inked?
Okay.
So we stop having all the uncertainty of this. Everyone's hearing we've got 90 deals that are in the air. You can't juggle 90 balls at once. Okay, let's start solving the first one, and the second one, and the third one, and let's make some progress on this. My push to the administration is, I see what you're trying to do. That's a good thing to be able to open up markets for American products around the world. Let's land the first fish, and then let's keep going on it to be able to get this done because, and I'll just say this blunt, a lot of companies are freezing right now.
Yeah.
They're just not ordering. Can I tell you that happened with COVID, where we had a month or two of just freeze? The supply chain problems had 3 or 4 year tail on it. If we have companies around the country that freeze for a couple of months, we're going to have massive supply chain issues. 6 months, a year, 2 years from now, as we try to unwind, as so many people will have one part that they can't get anymore, and so the whole thing doesn't work as everything's trying to catch up. So we do need to solve this quickly.
All right, you heard it here. I'm going to ask my colleagues to bring me some of the questions. Do I have any, or should I keep going with my list? Okay, thank you, Luke. All right.
Counting on every question being.
All right, so Ukraine. We have more questions on Ukraine. All right, maybe I will. You probably all can answer Ukraine. So
I'd go to the general. That's where I'd go.
I'm going to go to the general. Well, first, I think you all. Well, you're in Ukraine a lot.
Yes.
You're doing about helping 2 million on humanitarian. You've been a huge voice of saying the threat about Putin. I don't know if you've served in Ukraine.
No, I have not.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna take this question and expand a little. How serious is it that we are make sure that we get it right on the humanitarian front and what we need to do on the recovery? And Senator, we're in the midst of a deal, maybe, but is it important that we still stay in the game to help Ukraine? Go. Fast question.
I would say on Ukraine, we try to follow humanitarian principles as a humanitarian organization, that we are not motivated by the politics, we're motivated by the human need. So we try to go in, when you're seeing vulnerable people in the midst of a political context, our desire is not to move and meet the human need in the midst of the conflict. So we try to be neutral within the parties and provide humanitarian assistance to anyone who is injured on both sides as we try to move on the humanitarian principle.
Putin's a KGB thug and a dictator. And he moved in unprovoked into Ukraine and started slaughtering his neighbors. And I don't think it's wise for America to sit by and just watch that and assume that doesn't keep going into Poland and keep going to Moldova, keep going on that. And so there's a real benefit to American national security and the global economy by stopping that war as fast as we possibly can and halting his advance on that. So the challenge now is to try to get Putin, who doesn't want to halt, to be able to halt. And that's going to be the challenge. Putin's going to stall this out as much as he can. The last step that Putin really needs is to take the last port that Ukraine has left on the Black Sea, that's Odessa. They've taken every other port. The only one that's left is Odessa. If they take Odessa, I think they then say, okay, we're done, because then they know they own Ukraine. If their biggest exports are things like wheat and sunflower oil and pig iron steel and things that fertilizer, things that all need a shipping, they control Ukraine at that point if they control all their ports. And so we've got to be able to keep that last port open, or Ukraine cannot survive this. So I think that is important to be able to stop it now. I don't have a problem with negotiating. They're locked in World War I type trench warfare at this point. That will be long-term and protracted and a tremendous amount of casualties, but Putin cannot take Odessa.
I'll just add a big thank you. We've been very supportive of America staying engaged to support Ukraine, so thank you for your voice. So I have one in Africa, one on the Middle East, so let me ask maybe the two of you to touch on Africa. You just, I don't know how recently, but you traveled to the Horn of Africa is a question. On a Codell, I think you were there to thank the National Guard, the Oklahoma National Guard. So what inspired you to go on that trip? How important is Africa? I don't know if you served in Africa. Europe, maybe. But if you think, I'd be interested from a national security point of view where you see Africa. Senator, tell us about your trip, General, on Africa, both of you, the two of you.
Well, thank you. First of all, I think, Senator, you said it brilliantly about Ukraine and its place in the world and what we must do. I think the applause you got was richly deserved. I can speak now as a small businessman about Africa. Africa is primarily in our growth vision. We're in a business that primarily optimizes the opportunity to develop the undeveloped places where human populations exist. It is absolutely essential that we reverse what has been a very, very aggressive Chinese effort to take over Africa. They have begun very cleverly by working on the ports to gain access from a military standpoint to the continent, and they're expanding from that. They have the beachhead in a military term. Now what we have to do is reverse their initiative and over time show the benefit of the American way, which does not involve the kind of unfair deals that you were so aptly singling out, sir. So I think we have to get involved. We have to focus our foreign policy, and it's appropriate that we have an Africa command. The tragedy is our Africa command remains headquartered in Europe. And I think that's symbolic of the political issues that we take on in the international world. Who would be willing to host us? Who is willing to signal to the other major powers that are very interested in Africa that we in fact have a rightful role? So we have major issues and opportunities.
And when I was just there recently, we had an AFRICOM briefing, and I was expecting them to tell me how much China was everywhere. What I didn't expect is them to tell me how much Russia was doing economically. I knew they were doing military, but I didn't expect the economic. Senator, thoughts?
Yeah, so I was in the Horn of Africa last year on Veterans Day, actually, over that weekend to go visit with our troops that were there on the ground. They spent a year in Djibouti, in Somalia, and in Kenya. And the folks that were in Kenya didn't want to tell the folks that, hey, it went a lot better than it did in Somalia and in Djibouti, okay, by the way.
I bet.
But and the fun part of this, and Oklahomans can understand this, we flew over and we delivered to the troops Chick-fil-A sauce and Head Country barbecue.
Ah, good for you.
So that's what we...
No wonder they were so excited to see you.
Yeah, it's like they were excited to be able to see Head Country barbecue and Chick-fil-A sauce. But we spent time with them just to be able to say thank you. Africa is incredibly important to not only the world, but to our own national security as well, for a whole host of reasons that are there. It has been exceptionally difficult. There's been a great amount of instability. We've had 10 different coups in Africa just in the last few years. It has become increasingly unstable as America 25 years ago blew off little countries across the world like Afghanistan. Like, why do we care about that? Now we're having to be able to learn names like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and AQAP in the region and different areas, and we think, okay, why does this matter to us? It matters in our own national security. If we withdraw from places and allow terrorism to be able to thrive in that spot, it does come home to us. And so it is beneficial to the homeland that we do stay engaged. We'd like to see Africa thrive. There are countries that are thriving in Africa, but they're few at this point. With the instability there, and where instability occurs, you get violence, you get famines, you get all the things that then breed more and more terrorism on that. And so if we want to be able to keep a lid on terrorism, you've got to be able to make sure there's less instability.
So I have 4 questions that are all kind of picking up on this, and it all deals with our, the shuttering of USAID and the use of the toolkit. And so I'm going to kind of combine these, and so thank you to Bree and to Crystal and to several of you who asked about this 1% of the budget. It's actually less on USAID. And they're interested in how we make sure that we achieve what we've been trying to do, to address the stability of these communities so we don't get Boko Haram. But they're interested in, with 1% of our spending going to international aid, why would we pull out and halter investments that, how do we do the reevaluation is one. How do we protect Americans from global diseases, especially with the World Cup coming, is another. What's the future? How do we rebuild and restructure? I'm just giving you a sense of what people are asking. How do we support women's economic empowerment, knowing it's effective? So I think there's a real question of, here we're shuttering these programs, we're canceling 83% of our programs, but there's still room for this. How do we get it right? What's the future look like? If you could wave your magic wand, what would Senator Langford do?
Yeah, I would go through State Department USAID and look for areas that most Americans would say, why did we fund that? Mm-hmm. And this is something many of you know, I've done a federal fumbles report for years, just to be able to highlight areas that ask the question, how did this get through the system? Why did we fund this? I'll give you, for instance, from a couple of years ago, we funded the rebuilding of an ancient temple in China with our funds. And we're like, we literally borrowed money from China to then turn around and be able to send it back to them. Most Americans would say, The Chinese have the capacity to be able to do that on their own. There's a different way for us to do diplomacy with China than to do that. Last year, I raised the issue that we spent quite a bit of money funding a drag show in Ecuador. Like, if the Ecuadorians want to have a drag show on that, that's fine. That's their choice on it. Why is American tax dollars going to be able to fund that? And most folks would say, hey, that's not the best use of our tax dollars. Part of the challenge that we have is that's happened so many places and times. Now there's a pushback in D.C. to say, stop it all. Well, the baby bathwater thing still is true, okay? We still got a problem here. We still need to be internationally engaged. So when I talk to Marco Rubio about this, I bring this up to say we are going to be engaged. Many of you have heard Senator Rubio, now Secretary Rubio, speak about these issues. He wants to lean in to what's happening around the world, and I think is actively working to be most strategic to be able to re-engage. So what I anticipate they're going to do, ask me in a year on this, is they're going to put a hard pause on a lot of these programs, reevaluate quickly, work with our embassies there, and establish what's most strategic to be able to re-engage. I don't see our Secretary of State as someone who wants to be an isolationist. He's just not. I know him too well to be able to know his heart. President Trump knows his heart as well. It wouldn't have picked him if he didn't already know what his passion is as well on this. So I think there's going to be this rebalance, and I think it's going to be incredibly difficult for a lot of organizations and entities in the meantime to figure out what to do. So I go back like I do with tariffs. Make the decisions as fast as we can. Let's engage in the spots that we can, because it's important that America does not withdraw, but we also don't waste taxpayer dollars on things that we should not do that don't really help our priorities.
One of the questions is about food security, given that Oklahoma is, fourth in the U.S. in the number of farms. Nearly 3/4 of the state's lands are dedicated to agriculture. How do you feel about if we pull back on our food security efforts?
Yeah, we have pulled back significantly. I think that's one of our greatest risks because it creates instability immediately in those countries where there's instability. But you're right. I was at the O'Keene Flour Mill 2 years ago. They were very proud that what they were working on at that moment, I just happened to visit them, was actually flour that they were milling that was about to be sent out with USAID around the world. They were super excited at the American flags on the packages as they were going through to make sure they're shipping them out, and they felt like we are sending a message to the world that Oklahoma and the United States cares about you, and we want to be able to be engaged.
So here's one of the really interesting questions. Senator, won't you run for president in 2028?
No.
Well, we have time for one closing question before before you have an important phone call and my colleague's going to come up and close this. There's so many questions I think we would all love to answer, and I'm sorry if I did not get to all your questions. But you're so thoughtful in just practical ways of approaching the complexities of choices. And I'd love maybe you could just close with one of your favorite travels of where you saw America at its absolute best, of what we have to use as our North Star of saying this is how we get it right.
Heading to most of our embassies is always very, very moving to be able to see people on the ground. They're trying to move economically, religious liberty, freedom areas is always moving. I'll tell a quick Oklahoma story. It's an old story. It's from 2017. 2017, I was in Lviv, which is in far western Ukraine, visiting with our Oklahoma National Guard again, because they spent the year in Lviv, Ukraine, teaching the Ukrainian soldiers how to be able to repel a potential Russian invasion. Many people have said to me, the Ukrainians lasted a lot longer against a much larger Russian military than we thought. Everyone thought Kyiv was going to fall in a week. I would smile at them, I would say, Oklahoma National Guard went in literally for a year, reconfigured their entire command structure, because it was a shambles. It was set up still in a Soviet-style command structure where they couldn't make decisions in the field on it, reconfigured their entire command structure, worked to be able to do some basic training of how to be able to fight, taught them how to be able to repel a much larger military. We did that in 2017, and then when the Russians invaded, those folks were now commanders and leaders in every single area all along that front and pushed back a much larger, much better equipped Russian military. And I watch it and think Oklahomans were a part of that before we were ever there on it, helping people actually defend their own lives and homes.
I love that. I love that.
To thank and close out our program, I want to turn it over to my colleague, Luke Wentz, who is our Western and Military Director. Luke, over to you.
Well, thank you, Liz. Thank you all very much for being here. Thank you to Bob and to General Speaks and, of course, Senator Langford. We're honored to not only have you join us, but I think everybody in this room can say they're honored to have you and lucky to have you as United States Senator representing Oklahoma. So thank you one more time. Second, the senator was kind enough to sign my book earlier, but Steve, as head of security, got one that says, "To who it may concern," so I feel very special. Sorry, Steve. Truly, the best part of my job is having the opportunity to get to know all of you and spend time with such great leaders here in Oklahoma. A special thank you to our Oklahoma Advisory Committee and our co-chairs. We're grateful for your voice and your leadership. I'd like to ask you to all save the date for USGLC's upcoming Impact Forum. It's the 9th and 10th of June in Washington, D.C. If you'd like to join us, we would be happy to have you. And I'd invite all of you, if you're new to USGLC, to look up on the screen. We're going to put up a little QR code, which if you're interested in being involved with us, take out your camera, put it on that, and you can stay apprised of the work that we're doing here in Oklahoma and around the country. And I'll just close with this, because I know, Senator, we've got to get you to a very important phone call, and just say, I hope that this is not the last time you talk about America's role in the world today, or tomorrow, or next week. When you're talking with your family and friends, obviously we've heard over and over today, the importance of why this matters for Oklahoma, why it matters for our economic security and our national security, and as we heard so much today, for the value proposition that we all hold dear. So I hope you continue to talk about this, talk about it with your family and friends, and of course, truly it's because of people like you that America remains a leading force of good in the world, and that America can continue to be safer, building a safer, stronger, and more prosperous world. So thank you, and prosperous America. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Senator. Well, have a good day. You can get a photo.